What's up out there? I hope this microphone's working. Let me check. Okay, we got the last full moon of winter going on. Microphone up, probably right about there. This is the start of my presentation. This is RENÉG. Shout out to Bell in Lions Den, Hartford. I got my Lions Den shirt. I'm going to bring that into this presentation. And we're going to start off with life. After the beat, we get the breath. So I'm going to start off at home base. I want to make sure this is proper here, because once I get going, I'm going to be in my groove here. I'm in my groove here, so calibrate. We look at home base, like in baseball, or we think about home base as where we're born. This is the symbol for a home. We know love can turn a house into a home. An artist will work with what they got and make it work. Okay. So there we see 3 triangles. That one's kind of hidden, like sleep. Like that one's kind of a sleepy hidden one. You put that boom, like almost like a Z, right? I heard Sanchez say flash and flesh. We know that we're born like fish into water. And that's the symbol for Jesus. So I'm getting into the Bible here because I'm starting with life with Adam and Eve breathing, because the first part we get is beating. At the start, we get the heart. Start, heart, start. Then we get the breath. So when we look at the heartbeat, it's on a heart monitor. We know death is a flat line, like the negative sign. So on the heart monitor, so we're at the center here, because the center is the start, like the placenta, which is the first home. And the placenta is the first place you enter. So in this home is also the focus, like 0. So you take your first breath in the placenta before you're born, or while you're born, either one. I got to look that one up. But it's in the no, because your heartbeat's in the placenta. You take your first breath in the placenta like a fish. So we take our first breath. That's another reason I'm doing this live. It's like a fish. So we're born in the water. So life emanates. And when we look at the M and the N in the alphabet, that's in the center. Like the placenta, we enter, like enter the dragon. And so we're born in the water, which is like a wave. Now we wave high, we wave by. Another reason we wave by is because we're going into 2 different roads here. We're going into 2 different roads. So that could also be looked at as by, and then RD is roads. So we see birds. And we know that the M also reads bulls, like ember. So we're dealing with elements as well here because we're from the center. And this also resembles lightning. So we take our first breath. These two roads, I'm getting into this push and the pull. Now, if we put the two words together with push and pull, we get the word pulse. We get push and pull together, we get pulse. We also see pulsate. Pulsate. And also we know that life emanates. Emanates. So we know that the first breath is in. And then out. In the alphabet, we see LMNO. In the symbol, we see a symbol that could be that connects, interchangeable, from an interchangeable angle. So we know that the green chakra is the center. And here we're doing with travel, like the Green Mile. And we know that's dealing with a prisoner. So we do LMNOP, do that backwards with a W, because that wave can also be seen as a W. So we go this way, we can see POW. And then we know that's an L, and we know that we're dealing with a pulse, a pulsation. So if we switch that left from left to right, we get power, right? So we get power. So we know that a lot of these stories, we see connections having to do with power and energy. And when we're talking about frequencies, we're talking about like monkey bars swinging on what connects through visualization, through sounds, through frequencies. And the way you read frequencies is from the heart. Because when you say words or anything, everything's kind of a lie because it lies down like a falling domino behind you or a ripple behind you. So everything lies down in a way. Way is kind of like wave. And when you look at direction, the lowercase d-i-r, flip it the other direction, you could see, rib. So I'm going to get into that right now because we're dealing with vibration. And when you see rib, you also see the birds having to do with that as well because we're dealing with light. We're dealing with light and we're dealing with weight. We're dealing with AM, going from the beginning of the alphabet to the center. We're dealing with AM. And we're going from the N. Now I lay me down to sleep. Sideways becomes a Z. We're dealing with night. The T is in that direction. Anyway, we're doing night and morning. Now another way of seeing that, this is as a mountain. This wave is a mountain. And we know that Jesus rose between two crosses. And so we're also kind of getting into a ship, which is similar to this home. So when you look at ship, there's a band called Fish, and they spell it with a PH, which is also has to do with balance as well when you get into pH balance. You can kind of see fission as well. But we move that P over, two H's, but we also see ship. So another way of writing this L to connect the dots here, because we're dealing with angles, we're dealing with illumination, L, M, N, O. Now we're dealing with spelling, and they took cursive out of spelling, and we say curse. Curse is in cursive. We're talking about what occurs. We're dealing with the current events. And we talk about current, we're talking about now. We're talking about the currents. We're talking about currency. So you see here in the vibration NOW, we see now. And if we see this like the lowercase L, we see the I, we see the omni, this vibration now. And we see on this how people are chasing money and energy. Another way of looking at a ship is with these patterns. They say salesmanship, you're selling something for money. Also sailing, and we're dealing with wind, and we're dealing with the mind, and we're dealing with independence, because we're dealing with the one, because the M can be written sideways like a E. And then we also have one, we have the wand, which energy is written with that wand. And M is also the 13th letter, but it can also be written like a 3. So we see this flickering pattern that happens with the wand that creates these ripples. So as we add that P, we also see a pond. So we're dealing with that fish. And we see that fish. There's no fish without water. So we're dealing with that elemento. And a baby fish is a minnow. And we're dealing with the middle. And we bring our palms. We bring our palms together. Palm. We get namaste. Said 3 syllables as one. Sipping some tea. Okay, so we're dealing with the force. And right there in the middle, we're dealing with Yoda, talking about the force being with you. Because we're talking about they say rebuke the devils, also to re-cube. So we're dealing with this cube. Maze. So yeah, Ewok is woke, and they live in trees. So we know Jesus was crucified between 2 trees. which is also sounds like 2 3s. Put that on hold for now, because that gets into the birds. I'll keep that up top here so I remember to finish that one, having to do with the birds. Because with the 2 crosses in the center chakra being green, we know that the cross in the middle, we're also dealing about the source, which is also a 10 if you put it sideways, because Jesus carried the cross on a lean when he carried it, because we're dealing with movement with that M ocean. We're dealing with motion, empathy. Damn. Because we're dealing with the 2 paths with the birds, the by roads. We're dealing with empathy and we're dealing with apathy. So we also see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Because there's 3 T's in Teenage Mutant. And Mutant. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's 4 T's, but either way, teenage. Yeah. So, and then we're dealing with Master Splinter. So we see the LMNO. And then we're dealing with the ripples in the pond. So rip is also rib, that pulls. And we're dealing with him and her together. We're also dealing with sure. Like secure. Because we're dealing with Sherlock. That's the switch. It could be the switch. So I want to get into the Wicked Witch of the West. Because we're dealing with light and weight. And we're dealing with the Wizard of Oz. Because Teenage Ninja Turtles came from the ooze. I don't want to speak super fast. I had a coffee earlier today, which I'm not going to do anymore. Try not to. So we're dealing with that ooze. So this is what's up. When we're dealing with light and weight, when we go from the center, we also got the O to the Z, so we got the OZ with that. So we're dealing with weight, light and weight. And in the middle, too, we're also dealing with the middle. Because Moses had his staff, deal with the M, which is also the 13, which is the staff. We're also dealing with fast, because we're dealing with eating. We're dealing with eating. You know, with the emanating. So that's where the Last Supper. Jesus Christ, JC is 1-3. Jim Cramer with the stock market is 1-3. So they have like a wand too. So in the middle, you also have idle, which is the pause, to pause. Like you put your 2 paws together. Like you have 1 paw, you got 2 is pause. 1 is a paw, which is like a map, which is an amp. And then we do dealing with pan, also dealing with pan, which is a nap. We're dealing with zap. So we got amp and we got zap. So this has to do with the seesaw and the lightning. So we look at lightning. Lightning's got 2 ends. The word lightning. Because at the start, it's let there be light. Um, let there be light go out. Because if we look at that L like an I, breathing in and out, so we're dealing like an outlet. And we can also see mouth because we're dealing with speaking and spelling. Spoke life, spoke light. So they say Enki. Enki was the Sumerian god of water. So when they say him, we talk about Jesus, we talk about him. I believe in him. We're talking about him, which is a rhythm. We could say rhythm. Rhythm. Nothing moves without a rhythm. So we're dealing with this with the rhythm. And then you get that O and the L, we're dealing with. It's going to get into Adam and Eve because we're dealing with the vowel. Which could also be looked at as a capital L sideways as the V. There's different ways of looking at it, but we can see the patterns coming from the center. So owls can see in the dark. So when we deal with middle, MID, we're also dealing with dim, dimming the light. So owls can see in the dark. So also if we flip this around and upside down, we could see down. Well, we could also see moles, mole, M-O-L, because they live underground, which is down, M-O-L, which is also how light is measured. Is measured by the surface area in the tail, which is mole. So check this too. We see the fish. We're also dealing with Enki. Enki was the Sumerian god of water. We also see the keyhole or the door. So this also gets into the doors and why they use the number 13. Live, I don't want to get into too much of my albums. That might take too much time. So also getting into words. So words, we're also dealing with the sword. And they say that the pen is mightier than the sword. If we look at the L like a sword or the wand, like a samurai with his sword, like focusing the mind, which is the wind, like a sailor sails his ship. When the wind isn't going in your direction, you capture the wind that's going in your direction. So we're dealing with harnessing the wind, like harnessing the mind. So when we want to focus, we put our mind to our body or bring it to now, to the omnipresent, which is through breathing, in and out breathing, and shun, which is noise. So when we're dealing with this pulse, with the push and the pull, we can also see how apple was chosen because Adam and Eve covered themselves with fig leaves. And the Latin translation, they turned it to apple, which is malum. Six or 10 vowels. Either way, it's the only difference in their vowels is one like that and then one with that staff, which is long and short. But what I'm getting at here, mal is bad and also has to do with lamb. And why they used apple. Hang on. Let's get into Abraham and all this shit. But we're dealing with a pull because we're dealing with sounds too. So we're saying apple is a pull, like pulling, like the pulse, the push and the pull. So we're flipping, we're dealing with directions because we're dealing with currents. We're flipping this around like a musical note. Also dealing with notes and tones. We're also dealing with the sword and the stone. So this is the stone, like the Rolling Stones. This is the sword. So also I'm going to get into reflections because we're dealing with water. So like the wizard Merlin pulled in the sword from the. All right, I gotta let the suspense build on this one because we knocked that L over. We push that over. We get abra because we're also dealing with sounds. We're dealing with sight and sound. So we see abra. And then when we look at the core, which has to do with the 1 and 2, which has to do with the A and the B, which has to do with the pa, with the pa, and the DA, the dad, and it gets into them. You get into the Papa Legba and a whole lot of shit with this one. But the reason I get into the 1-2, this is gonna decode a lot of shit. Like when I was a kid, like I said in a past stream, I kicked ass at the monkey bars because I used to know which ones to grab and move like lightning, right? So they tell us that we came from apes, keep us from the apex. So it's just like the now key, dealing with the N key, scrambling that, MNO, right? We get monkey. Like attention, uh, scrambling our attention, or where we came from, or our power of grounding, because our arrogance keeps us from grounding. So, with the Wizard of Oz, the wicked witch of the West melted in water. So it's crazy because when we look at the center, we got the 6 triangles, just like the core of the apple. We could also be looking at light and dark. Now, when we look at, they say Lucifer was the morning star, just like birds is by roads, which is also getting into the Bibles, the 2 poles. So deep. When we look at the A and the M, it's the same. It's the same except for the flipped triangle. when we put those together, we see the 6 that's in the core am. And then we're talking about now at the center right here. So we say, now I lay me down to sleep. We're dealing with the 2 triangles. Damn, I don't want to lose what I was thinking of before. What was it just talking about? Getting into the G-force, the 6 and the 7. Okay, so we're dealing with the Baphomet. Okay, just gonna get me into like get and target because we're dealing with the heart and getting. Uh, but this has to do with teeth and eye for a tooth for a tooth and eye for an eye because we're getting into the owl eyes with the end-finned T because we're dealing with that fin, the fish fin. What was I thinking of before I wrote that? Hang on 1 second. It'll be on my next one if I can't think of it now. The center. We see recent. And ear. And we're dealing with the positive and negative. I lost my thought with the when I got into the triangles, and there's something I was thinking of. I'll have to put it in my next one. Um, it was like massive lightning that I have to come back to me. Get into the seesaw, but with the Baphomet, with the A and the B, with the tones, we see the scrambling of the tones with the B to A, and it's like the 2-to-1 when we see B to A, which that's where we see tone because we see 1 2 like 1 2 and 2 1 we see as tone, which is also 2 ohm dealing with now, and we're also dealing with that 1, which is also getting into how that 0 equals 1. Um, but we look at Adam and Eve. The N is hidden, like if we see hide N. En is the sound of N, just like Em is the sound of M. So I know that when we add the 3 M's, because this is getting into those triangles, we see the word Eve. Now this could also be looked at as events, like Eve vents. be negative and positive because we're dealing with movement. Because we're talking about currency, we're talking about current with the omni. Just like we're talking about sea, like the water, we're also dealing with the swing, but we're also dealing with string because we could also see weave. When we move that over, we also see weave. So when we look at the Wizard of Oz, we're also looking at Dorothy, which could be looked at as Dorothy, which is the cross. So cross could be looked at as source, like sorcerer, coming from the source. We could also look at it as scour, to scour the land. So we're dealing with weaving. Like you reap what you sow. Reap what you sow. We're dealing with the lion, dealing with the lion's den, with the heart, and the scarecrow. Damn, get into this one. So we're dealing with that bird too, with the crow, which has to do with represents death or afterlife. And you get to a good afterlife through working for your Lord. So if you put work the other way, you get crow. Crow, eat the crow like eat shit. Holy fuck. So we're getting into that eating. And the birds. Damn, we're doing scaring. So when you look at, so this abracadabra shit is deep. Because when you look at like A to Z, do you get awake to sleep? Awake is also dealing with death. And you also have make. Hang on. I'll lose sight of that A. The only word that begins with abra is abrasion. Abrasion. Dealing with that ripple effect. To thrash at. Or splinter. You also have the word zephyr, which is westerly, because we're dealing with vibrations. So now you move west, which is zephyr, which is westerly wind, which is what takes you to death, which is also dealing with the jackal. So we got J, K, L, right? So we're dealing with that jackal going west from the center. So zephyr, we're dealing with fear. We also see the word fear in zephyr. So people are ruled from the center or whatever with fear through their hearts, capturing their minds like wind. HI, we get Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Swing high, swing low, swing chariot. You take the high road, I take the low road. So check this out. I gotta write it out so I remember, because I already forgot. No. Oh, this shit's deep. So the L could be written like this. This shit's so fucking deep. So P is also a 7. And you could write it like this too. So we got the L and the 7. LMNO. I remembered what I was gonna see on Virgo. So check this out. So we're dealing with that one eye. We're also dealing with the one knee. So you get down on one knee. So you get surd, someone's knighted, so dealing with that night and day. You get knighted from the queen, only the queen, just like chess, just like chess, because we're dealing with con chess. The CC, we're dealing with a constant current, because Moses split the Red Sea. So with the hymn, we know that the M takes on the N and the sound typically. But if your third eye is open, we could see this another way. What we say from the queen, we're dealing with frequency, free queen, C. And that C is we're dealing with what you see. Like Moses splitting the Red Sea. But we also know that the G is the seventh letter, so we're dealing with G force, which is also going to get in the 6 and the 7 because we see the 6 triangles and we see the 7s separating that. So with the 7 is split by the V, which is the 5 in the 4, or the 7 sideways. There's a lot of ways looking at this. What I'm getting at is what's seen. So this has to do with the C and the saw. Another thing about N key, which is N key, like that key. I forgot what I was saying. Also dealing with the L, we see the line, and we see the den. So we're dealing with the ripples, and we're dealing with focus. We're dealing with hocus pocus. And also Jesus rose. He also rise. You can see that as rise, risen, risen. Huh. Oh, it's just so fucking deep. So when we get into that N, because also hidden, this is getting into the lion's den. Enki. His name was changed to AE. Which had to do with something I erased. But anyway, Enki, whose name was changed to AE, had to do with some shit I erased. Fuck. Lion's Den. Okay, so when we look at the North Pole, because we're dealing with the center, is the North Pole, and that's what's hidden, right? Which also we're dealing with that lightning. N light N, we're dealing with that moving out from the north and out. So we deal with North Pole. So the mind of energy here, give me my props, because this shit right here, this shit's so fucking deep. North Pole. So I title this Truth Hurts, because we deal with Hertz. We see pool. So just like so in the North Pole, we see Hertz pool. So we look at Baphomet with that scrambling. If anybody wants to check my vegan Insta, the name is Self-Esteem. I'm working on my recipes. But while I pull this up here, I'm going to my What It Is, which deals with symbolism. We see all these symbols like this with reflection. And we say REM, rapid eye movement, going backwards. It sounds like myrrh, like the herb, like the incense, myrrh, like mirror. Baphomet is what I'm looking for. Okay. Also, when we see the rib from Adam, we're dealing with a verb. Rib and Eve, we're dealing with verbs. So we're doing that movement. So I just want to explain some of this stuff here. Because sometimes I'll write down stuff to spark my mind. And come off rather intricate without explaining. Let's see. Oh, shit. Yeah. So when we look at Omni 2, we could also see in, out. We could also see in, mouth. And with those, with that, the same triangles, two together, we see the Pac-Man. Fuck, I'm gonna get into this. That has to do with the eating. That's why I have symbolism like this. It's crazy. All right, so check it. Baphomet. We also see that here. Let me get the so we're also dealing with the feather right here. We're also dealing with the feather, which we also see the word like further, future, which has to do with that focus. So it's the BA and then faux met. So faux is off. So it's like the tones that off met. Because 2-1 is tone. Faux is also off. And then met. And we're also dealing with time. Because we're dealing emitting time. Emitting. This gets mad deep. But let me get focused on this here. Because this is Moses splitting the sea. Because M is in the center, the middle. The M, idol. Which idol do you worship? You know, when you pause with your hands together, like prayer is your pausing. So we're dealing with this movement. And then you look at the horns and you look at the crossed legs. It's the same symbol. So what we did is we turned that a quarter turn. So that's changing with what you see. And like the quarter, we know that the eagles, the bird is on the quarter, which a bat was on the 2020 quarter. You could think about that one. A bat was on the 2020 quarter. Woo. So a quarter is 1 over 4 or 2.5. So a quarter is 5 or 7. So we see this combination. So like a clock, we see that C with that current C dealing with what you see, how it seems. Like C, you add that M is a seam, like we're sewing, dealing with seams. We see C lock, we're dealing with the clock. So anyway, because when we look at the 7, we see what's seen split by the V, which is a Roman numeral 5. We see it's 5 letters. Nieves is dealing with Our Lady of Magnetism, snow. So when we look at thought, if we write out thought, we could write it out like wind, or we could also write it out like thaw, which can also be written as hot, H-A-W-T, so thaw and hot. So we could look at that as eyes, as ice, or we could look at it like, because I made me think of Vanilla Ice and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Ice Cube, which is like eyes cubed, Ice Cube. But we could also look at that as the source, the cross. Because where it comes together is where it's frozen, right? The movement is centered. So, oh shit. So we're also dealing with watts and electricity. Like clock, we're dealing with that sure lock, because sure is his and her is sure. Used to have, are you sure or unsure with the raising the arms, deodorants, all this symbology, right? We're dealing with watt, because Sherlock and Watson is what's on, or watts on, electricity on. So when we deal with ET, etc., like verb, or dealing with that movement, we also see electricity, and we also see ETC is pronounced like X, etera. Now, if we do it like this way, if we swing that like a hinge, because we're dealing with these, I notice a lot of these symbols pop out when you turn things like a quarter direction or certain angles, right? So you can get tangled up like knots, but it's like when your third eye sees the connections, it just cuts through all the bullshit. So when you look at where the hands are pointed, so this is dealing with that pulse. And pulse 8. Calibrate is dealing with the cabal. And they use a symbol like this, which is the M, and we're dealing with that downward triangle. Let's see, I got a picture of it. Like Spock. So we can also see the Roman numeral 6, and we also see the Roman numeral 4, which not only is at the 10, we're dealing with a cube like a chessboard. It has the 64 pieces, right? So we're dealing with the conchas. And there's different ways of splitting the 8 that we can see connections. Like so we're dealing with light and weight, which is the 3 and the 5. That's one way of splitting the 8. Because we're dealing with the atom and even. This has to do with the C and the saw. And we're also dealing with late. We're dealing with time, and we're dealing with tail. So we're dealing with that tail, the eating, telling, outlet, telling from your mouth, outlet. Um, hmm. So we're dealing with the pond, and we're also dealing with the well. We're dealing with the well. We say welcome. That's not spelled with 2 L's, it's spelled with 1. And come, like pushing and pulling. So we're also dealing with welding. Ding dong. Shit. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Ding dong, the witch is dead, which is also like ping pong. The wicked witch of the west is dead because she melted with the M in water. The Wizard of Oz hid behind the curtain. You couldn't see him, like the N is hidden or the Z is asleep. The Wizard of Oz was behind the curtain. So the seesaw also makes me think of the AE with the N key, because with the seesaw, because all is vibration. And when we're dealing with focus, that's really what the future is. The future is nothing but focus because it's imagination. And when we're dealing with alchemy, we could also see that the 1 as an A. Hang on. I have to get back to the abracadabra, but this also has to do with the welding and the alchemy. Kintsugi. Kintsugi is the golden repair of broken pottery by the Japanese with welding, which I think is one of the most beautiful art forms. All right, so we're dealing with damn, open sesame. There's more ways of doing this. Like we could do bait because we're dealing with eating, and we're dealing with gate. 7 and 2. Hang on. 8 and 7 is gate. So 8 eating in past tense and gate. Bait and fate. Fate having to do with that focus. Kate. And 8. Hang on. Late. Late is the 3. This doesn't have to be this. Okay, so we're doing that light in the weight. Okay. I just fell out for a second. Hang on. Date, and date. That's equal 8. So the 8 split, we're dealing with that 4 and the 4. So we're dealing with the force. And we know date, we're dealing with that male and the female. Which also, dates are the healthiest food you can eat for your heart. I just had a shake with dates. What makes me think of today, because we're dealing with time. So when we're dealing with date, we're also dealing with current. We're dealing with that omni that's meeting in the middle where it's even. So this, the C and the saw, the seesaw. See that the A is like splitting the seesaw. And so we see the CD. We see the CD as that symbol, and then we see the A as what's breaking up the seesaw. Because we're doing this by symmetry, right? And you can kind of see the Ankh in there too, because that gets into knot. Because I'm getting into this right now. Because a seed sprouts in the dark. Because in the middle we're dealing with dim. In the mid we're dealing with dim. So we're dealing with the seed. And we're doing abra and abra. We're doing abrasion and abrasion. And then we have the seed in the middle. DC is the center of Washington. Virginia, okay, because it's part of Maryland, which is Mary magnetism. Virginia is for lovers, having to do with the heart. And we look at electromagnetism, we're also dealing with that 33. So that's also the 2 birds dealing with vibration. And we see lion could also look as line. We could also look at it as a line, to align, because we're aligning forces. So this has to do with the G-force as well. So we're going to look at this sideways like a cross, like Jesus carries the cross. We're also doing like those 2 arrows to the center, like those 2 arrows to the 13. But we're going to look at this like G's. So this is like the aura. This is like the energy coming from what we embody. The M is the center, right? So we're also dealing with that triple crown, like the W, like that 5. That's the fisher of men. But in that symbol, we see like the 2 sevens. And then we see like a hook. J is the 10th letter. 10 is also the X. I'm going to get into this shit. This has to do with the eating and the energy right here. But we see the 2 G's with the 7 and the 6, right? And we see the human, which also kind of looks like lumen, kind of sounds like lumen. It's kind of like an L2. Being is also like bing. It's kind of like a sound like bing. If you bring the R vibration, we got bring. Oh, shit. Washington. So it's interesting. Washington has to do with wash. Wash. In Swedish, the word solskin means sunshine, or it means like darling. But in English, it sounds soul, skin. So we have to do with the sinking. Sinking is dealing with the light and the weight. And it's also syncretism. So synchro, we're also dealing with the rowing. We're dealing with the rowing of the boat. This also has to do with arrow. Pharaoh could have to do with the hocus pocus, like the HP computer symbol. Ophiuchus is the 13th sign. So at the center is Jesus, the 13th, dealing with the Last Supper and the eating. So the two thieves, the two threes, threes are also spelt with T's, which are also trees because the H is hidden or silent. It's also a ladder, so we're dealing with heaven and hell, which is Eve, N, which both represent 5, and L, which could also be looked at as straight up L, hell, or the 1. Anyway, we're also dealing with focus because 1 is wander, 1 is now, 1 is own, and 0 equals 1. When you put the 1 and the 2 together, we get the 3. When we put the 1 and the 2 together, we get tones. If we spell tone as B and A. So it's about putting things together like kintsugi. I gotta get this word down. Kintsugi. So when we see like words like devil, it kind of sounds like double. So we're dealing with this M. So when we're dealing with time, we're dealing with tying. So when you get like male and female together, we tie the knot. So tie knot is also the ankh. So the ankh, talk about Enki and all that, comes from Tayet in Africa, which sounds like Abraca. So we see tie yet, which could be, it's like tying what's to happen, which hasn't happened, right? Um, so we look at these arrows. We're dealing with that rowing the boat. So when we look at the symbol in the middle, it could also be looked at as a quill. So hang on, I'm all over the place. So with knot and unknot, the 6 and the 7 together is the G force. So we're dealing with energy. And ankh can be written as can, and it could be written as not. So we got can and cannot. So I'm showing how things sync through frequency. And then there's that movie dealing with time, which is called In Time. Justin Timberlake. And then we could also see red, flipping that over. We see red lake, like the lake of fire. So we're also dealing with that passion, propulsion, because we're dealing with a red chakra. So when they say the blue chakra is the throat. So the throat is like throwing, doing that pushing the pull, throwing the T or throwing that X, dealing with that electricity. Where we speak, so we say tell, T, and then we got L, which sounds like L, which looks like that straight up 1. which is L on the mountain. Go tell it on the mountain. Hotel California. So it takes it back to that house, that home base. So if we look at the home base in baseball, that that's how I started it. Let let there be light. So back to the lion's den. It's laying the lion down with the lamb. Excuse me. We also see sometimes I'll look at my notes and get lost in what I was thinking because I look at something that like trails me out. Like what the hell? Um, okay, so when we're dealing with palms, yeah, we're dealing with the trees, the two threes, the two thieves. We're dealing with the future and the past, which are stealing the present, which is what presents. And also dealing with the mid. They say in the midst. Is it when you say midst? That's like street. Like I was saying, roads. The by two roads. Middle, in the midst. So we're dealing with the past and present, and then we're also dealing with that mist. We're also dealing with that mist from the waves, high and by. So when we look at what occurs, we could also look at that like the O curse, the curse. Which is also rose, which is like rowing the boat, like rowing. So we look at beat, we're also dealing with that 13, which is the M, and then we got eat. Put that 13 together, it's B, like 2B. I mean, that's just another way of looking at beat. It has to do with my name. Anyway, when we look at dim in the middle. So we got mid garden. I'm glad I got a viewer, man, because you just brought my spark back. I was about to fall out for a second. Remember, I'm live. So we got dim. When I was a kid, like 12, I studied dim mak and martial arts and like kung fu and stuff. I like just watch nothing but ninja movies. So dim mak is pressure points. So we're dealing with the pressure. So we're dealing with the pressure, and then we're also dealing with we're dealing with a pull because we're dealing with pulling. Like we pull LMNOP, we pull that L to the right, R to the left. We get power. So we're doing that with that G force. or the energy force, or the energies us. Zeus. We got Midgarden, Midgard. Spell that right, Midgard. Which is also the Garden of Eden. So we're guarding the den, we're guarding the yen. Energy. The North Pole. Because we're dealing with that pole, so we see the pole. We see the N, we see the North Pole. The police is also pulling the ice. They lock you up in a cube. If you're not making the right moves, riding the right waves. Let's see. Dim. I see dime. Because in the middle we're dealing with that X, the electricity. So it's kind of like all these patterns emanate from the center with the water. Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Oh shit. Bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, so fence. You've got a fence around a garden. So when you fence, we say on guard. In power and arrow, we got row, just like word. So there was this album, OC, Word Born, Word Life, Word is Born, Word Life. And then there's a movie called Born Identity. But hang on, I was getting into Enter the Dragon. Because in Enter the Dragon, he fights the bad guy at the end in around a bunch of mirrors and is dealing with reflections. Fuck. So when we're dealing with this pool or we're dealing with this pond, there was also a game called Marco Polo that you play in a pool. And we're dealing with sounds just like frequencies. And we're dealing with hot and cold. And when you get closer to the center, we're dealing with heat, like heart. When you look at time, we got 24 hours, which equals 6. When you look at 1 o'clock in military time, it's also 1300. Hang on. When you get attention, dealing with tension. Okay, so 1300 is 4. Anyway, so this is what I'm getting at, right? We say 10-4. 10-4 is I got your attention. We're dealing with tension. We're dealing with 10. We also see ent. Hang on, we see net. So we're talking about that fish. But also we see entertainment. Enter. So we're dealing with entering because we enter at the center. There's also we see the net. Planet, play in the net. Plane. Or ET with the glowing finger is also 7 because we got that 5 on the 2. So one interesting thing about 6, 6 equals 7. 6 is a representation of 369 in one number, because when you look at it, see it, and hear it, we see 369 in 3 different ways. If I'm saying that correctly. There's no 13th level. So when we look at the word level, and we could look at that symmetrical either way, but we see it split by that V, which is also the 7, which also, excuse me, I'm getting tired. I got to sip my tea, and I'll come right back. So we're dealing with knowledge, the knowledge, the 2 trees, the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. The 3 of life. Let's think about the L for a second. See in knowledge, KNO, just like not is spelled KNO. We also see knock. So we're dealing with these frequencies like knocking. So when we say the book of Enoch is 3 knock, like 3 knocks. And 3 is also like Ewok. Hang on, but also you get you can see this many ways. But we're also dealing with that center to keep it where I'm at with this. So we get that center knock. So knowledge could be a play on Nostradamus. We also see on. We also see Ankh. Like not. Con, chess. So we look at Alpha Omega. A is also 1. It's the first letter. So we could see that as like the L. We see the Also, egg has those 2 G's. So we see like Moses splitting the sea. We see Moses with a staff splitting the sea in 2 different directions. Or hang on. Also dealing with that osmosis with the weight, light, and weight. But also we're dealing with egg. Because incubate is also to incube. To incube. The 8 is to incubate. This brings it back to the birds. So Alpha Omega. We're dealing with the egg with Omega. Well, we see the Alpha Omega right here. So we know Cocopelli played the flute. We also see that in Pepsi Cola or Coke and Pepsi. We see Cocopelli. It's dealing with these frequencies. But when I was talking about fear and Zephyr and the jackal, damn, going to the west. We know that we plug an outlet in. When we plug an outlet in, it goes into a jack. So when we're dealing with jacks, we're dealing with male and female, which also could be seen as Jack and Jill that went up the hill. And we could look at HIJKL as hijack. So when we look at there was no English language then. We're looking at that G hijacking, that G force hijacking. We're looking at that energy, right? Hijacking. Christ is the source energy. That cross, right? Sorcerer. There used to be a magazine called The Source. We're scouring, right? We're dealing with this eating. PO could be looked at as positive. We could also look at this as down, look down, and we also see low, like lowered. So when we see lowered, we're also dealing like Lord. We could see the word like Lord, which is a house, dealing with that home base, dealing with that house, which is a Lord landowner. So we see Christ, we also see that crystallize, like to pause. We know this pause is the 11, is the pause sign, like two pause together. It's also this K, and that the K sideways, when we turn that a quarter turn, like the 7 or the V, we get the pause sign. So we obviously see that as like walls. Wall is also law. We're dealing with law. We're just dealing with that pole. But when we deal with pause, we see POW right here, like pause. And then we could look at, damn, there's a lot of ways of looking at this shit. Pause 1-1. We could see that as pause 1-1, like the L and then ONE as one, like 1-1 right there, like L and ONE. Turn the M sideways. Like pause 1-1. So many ways to look at this. We also PO is positive and the L sideways, like the N goes sideways. If we knock the L sideways, that's a negative. So we see the swirling energy of positive and negative, like this living, beating, breathing energy. So at the center, they say the oldest, they say that we're from apes, which also you could play that around and say pay to pay, because we're dealing with money is omni, is OMMONI, scrambled. So ape could be looked at as ape. And we know that apex is the top of a wave, like a surfer. We know Sir is dealing with the serpent and currency, and rising to the top of the wave, or rising to the occasion. I don't know why I was just thinking about her and Monica. That was my mind yapping. But we think about paying. All right, my boss, I gotta come back. Sometimes that's how my mind works. We see that triangle, a lot of symbology. So with 20, like the $20 bill is dealing with that two X's, like the two crosses. It could also be seen as two X's that Jesus was crucified between. So we're looking at a paradigm. And if we're looking at like a paradigm shift, we could also look at that together, um, like a star. This is the 2020 quarter. Let's put out. Think about where a lot of stuff we're going through came from, supposedly. So Oannes had arms. So we look at Oannes, had the arms shaped like the going down on one knee. Symbolism like the two sevens, which we also see the on, the O, and the N. And the S could be like the seven separating. But we also see the fish. We see the fish and all that stuff. The taijutsu was the oldest form of the yin yang. There was one after that that had to do literally like two fish. We also see they look like commas. A comma could be seen as coma, like going to sleep, pausing like the movement, or the REM or the mirror. Okay, so we look at Apollo. We could look at the first letter, number one, is also A pulling the O. Like the old god Apollo is A pulling the O. Which also kind of sounds like the apple. I might have to show some album art. Let's see. Okay, taijutsu. The taijutsu is one circle. Or two C's. And we also see it with red and blue, which also looks like two commas. Also looks like two commas. Usually done red or blue. Or black and white. And that's kind of like the one eye. So we have the two together with the one eye. And so like Cyclops, we see cycle odds. Just like wash. I just did my laundry. I'm hoping that this shirt's not too shrunk on me. Because I don't want to be one of those dudes with like those super tight shirts. I like a little bit of breathability. So back to the beating and breathing. With the washing. Damn. So we use the Baphomet. Sounds like bath. And they say, wash your sins. Sins is dealing with sense. Knowing where you're coming from, where you're going. Since this, since that. You're usually told what's wrong with you. Since you did that, since you have to go to heaven, since this, since that. That's also taking away your omnipresence too. You're born in sense. Sense is also sense. Taking away your sense. We're born in sense. We're born in the sixth sense, back to the center. We're born with the sixth sense, which is taken away from us before we're programmed with like a living language, or basically programs. So I kind of bounced around a lot as a kid, so maybe I kind of look at things in different ways. Um, N is at the center of sense, and we got the two S's anyway. Chess, like chess. Your heart's in your chest. So, okay, LMNOP. Another way of looking at this. This is fucking deep. because the time was divided in the center with Christ, with the cross, and before his name was changed to J, it was IHS. So if you look at that backwards, it literally spells out shit. And I don't even look at that like a joke. I look at that as like that's been used as a word like ever since English. Because we're dealing with that eating and we're dealing with that pack man. Because when we see pack, we're dealing with that ABC. Because that P could be flipped as a B. And we're dealing with back. So we're also dealing with time. Like we catch a cab, we pay for a cab with money. So this M ocean is also the C that was split emotions with positive and negative. So when we look at this symbol, we also see mop because we're dealing with cleaning. And this is an old album I happen to have, MOP. We see the broken mirror like Enter the Dragon in the center. A lot of my friends were artists. My boy passed. I asked him, where are you getting a lot of these symbols from? Because I've done some research and like there's no way this stuff could just be coming to your third eye. And he's like, it just comes to me. I just get in the zone. And there's no question whoever does the artwork, though, does it in certain arrangements. Anyway, so peace to whoever did that. MOP, we're dealing with the mop, with the cleaning, right? Like the power at the center. We're also dealing with that triangle, and we're dealing with that. So that triangle is like the capital L. We're also dealing with the left and the right. Feel free to chime in if you're checking, because I'm covering a lot of ground here. So the bats in Wizard of Oz are also flying bats. Hang on. Okay, Nirvana. So Nirvana covered a David Bowie song. Plateau. It says there's nothing on the top. There's nothing on the top but a bucket and a mop and an illustrated book about birds. So we're dealing with the birds. It's back to the vibration. So earth, wind, and fire, we don't see water. Coming up to bat, that's up. So we say 10. Satan is also like Satan, but it's also like ant, which is an antenna. So what are we dealing with when we're dealing with antenna? Hopefully my eraser. Because we're looking at acronyms here. Just like the symbology in a lot of these records. With the radio waves, we see the ripple. So this is getting into the Grim Reaper. So we say Satan, it's saying tan. Different ways of looking at that. We could also look at that as ATN, which is attention. Two seconds. We're dealing with the outlet. We're also dealing with outcomes. So also dealing with Eden. We're also dealing with the needle. We could also say needing the L, which is could be seen as needing love, because we know that the healing takes place at the heart, and we're dealing with this duality, which is dual lit Y, which could be seen as a T. Shout out to Val for throwing that one. So dual light, lighting the source, lighting the candle from both ends. So we look at the ribbon, okay, like the symbol of my thumbnail. When I have coffee, I get really hyper and then I crash, and I'm at the crashing point, but I'm like up because the moon's out. So I'm riding my wave here. So we look at the ribbon. We also see the triangle at the ribbon. Running out of space. We're dealing with the Adam giving the rib to Eve, even. We got the ribbon, which has to do with on. The rib could also be looked at as one. Oh, man. Damn. So when we look at the home, because home is where the heart is, this also gets me into the field of dreams. So build it and it will come. Because field is also dealing with feelings. And then damn. So the middle verse, the longest verse, and the shortest verse of the Bible are Psalms. Dealing with the palms. That we could also see Sam with Uncle Sam. We're also dealing with mass. We're dealing with density. Dealing with the lion's den. And we're also dealing with lean. Dealing with the leaning. Is also dealing with the lane. Dealing with the roads. But also dealing with the nails. Dealing with the nails on the cross. Because there was 3 nails. 3 nails to the cross. And I wrote this down here somewhere. Psalms 117, 119, and 118. Shortest, longest, and center. Break to equal 3. And it's interesting that 3 looks like an M. So we're dealing with the Ark of the Covenant. The M and the N, we're dealing with the Noah's Ark. And we're also dealing with the 2 slabs. We're dealing with the 2 slates. The slates on the mountain that were written by lightning. With the 10 commandments. So we're dealing with that net at the center. I also see map. I see amp with maps. Sample. I don't know. I'm reaching. Hang on. So when I look at a lot of symbology, I see the bird. So do Mali too. We see animal and mal. And mal, like the malum dealing with the apple. We also see malice. We see benevolent and malevolent. Benevolent is good, malevolent is bad. Ben is also den, dealing with that lion's den. It's interesting, male too, malevolent. Hmm. Meal. We're dealing with meal. We're dealing with eating. Because the lion eats. That's what we're dealing with here. Because lame is weak and lion roars. We're dealing with eating the meal. So that's what I'm getting at. I skipped a beat here too with the eating. Dragon is dragging the on. Or dragging the on. I forgot what I was talking about before, divided by the two S's, but that made me think of Polaris because we're doing a polar at IS, like polarities of IS, and we see Sirius, we see ISIS, and the SI and the EIUS. We see is, and Polaris we polar is, so we see is in Polaris and in Sirius. So I'll continue with that one once I watch this. Um, FedEx. So dealing with that feeding and the arrow, like feeding the X. So we see lazy. Fed, dealing with the past. And the difference with past, because all we're dealing with, all that presents now is the past, because the future is our focus. So we're dealing with image, imagination, with the A and the M. The I and the J were both the Jesus, which go from the center to outwards, where we get the word image. So this is just looking at it another way here, because I'm looking at these two triangles. I'll have to get back to that one. Because I see the two eyes being split, because I and J are together, but they're split in image if you write it like that. So I know it's a little bit of reach, but when you take the Adam's rib away from past, you get psst, which is attention, which is right now. So a lot of Buddhist stuff, they'll ding a gong in between the meditation, um, or to keep with the now. It's interesting in vowel. You also see love. Okay, so I was talking about how light is measured in moles. When you look at the house, where the heart, you start, the house is the heart. You also see lawn, mowing the lawn. Which, surrounds the house because the L and the O is outside of the wave. So we see lawn. We got the lawn, mowing the lawn. We also see mow. We see mow and lawn. We see mow lawn right there because we're doing this vibratory frequency dance of what connects here, like monkey bars. Because this is RENÉG with a now key, unlocking this shit to the third eye. And it's interesting too, because not only is triangle the play button with the 3 syllables, syllable is 3. This was on Earth Day. I was going through my mind when I read that, but there's a lot of symbology there. So we say play, also dealing with that alpha omega, because we see play in alpha. But we see play A. So this is getting in also to the abracadabra. We see egg. We see like megapixel. Mega, like with small little growth. We see growth from an egg. We see an egg to mega. Different ways of looking at that. We see game. Game 6. Which is the 369. It could be the O, could be the 0, could be the game focus. It has to do with swimming in the pond. It's fish. Damn, I hit about 2 hours. So this is going to be part 1 of my presentation here. So I talked about Dorothy. And then impulse. Also talking about impulse. And I'll get more into abracadabra, doing life and death, cadaver. Ooh. Okay, so we're talking about the Lord. Another way of looking at Lord too. This makes me think of Lowe's. Because when we look at like the store Lowe's, it's spelled red is the lowest chakra. And then they say pull the wool over your eyes, like in hockey or whatever. So we say pull the wool like a mole that can see, that lives underground. But mole is how light is measured. So that gets into the Red Sea with the current sea. And now C is also the 3. So when we MC, we grab the microphone. When you MC, you have the microphone controller. And we're dealing with seams. So we're dealing with seams, like seeing the M, seeing the 3, seeing the third eye. Seen. So we're dealing with the Reaper and the So. So we see the M. That's how it seems. But we also see dealing with reaping what you sow. Grim Reaper doing merging, and then we see reappear. Interesting, we get that ape too. We came from apes. So we're merging is the apex at the top of the wave. Which was raped. Through religion, which is relighting. Holy shit. Religion is relighting. Forgot where I was going. So to leave it with this one, dealing with that tension. I showed the bafflement because we know we're dealing with a tension and that tan, ATN. If we write the symbols like the LMNO, like illuminating, we also see the V and the E too. Different ways of looking at it. Oops. We can see that as an arrow, like quilling an arrow, dealing with that willpower in the bottom chakra. But we also see this. He's got the whole world in the palm of his hands. So we're dealing with the palm trees, or like the mop is cleaning, mop with water. So we say, yo, we're getting attention. Yo, I'm getting your attention. Dealing with tension. So we see the yo-yo. And this cat, Steven, he's got the red, about the red chakra. You see like ripple effects right here. I think this full moon's giving me some energy because legit, I was like sleepwalking for a second. So when we look at this shit is really deep. So when we get into letters and numbers, sequence. So if we look at like Ezekiel, we see sequel. There's also talking about what we see in the seams of sewing. What you saw is what was. Saw was a horror movie. So there's nothing to fear when you have knowledge. So we see fear being a control mechanism along with taking away knowledge. So taking away knowledge is how fear is used. So when we look at a seesaw, 5 and 6. It's also 3 and 3. Interesting. C 1 2 3. 1 2 3. See, I don't look up connections. Connections speak to me, so I see there's no movement without the 1 and the 2. If you look at like the S with the Z, that can also be mazes, but so like they say riding the horse has to do with harnessing the energy. So we see horse. We're dealing with the rows, like rowing the boat, and the H is the ladder because we're riding the horse. It's like it's the ladder. It's the ladder up and down, and we're dealing with harnessing. So we see this horse in a lot of these symbology, like the unicorn. Lightning rod, dealing with order. And we're dealing with door. Okay, another thing too. Okay, about the Moses on the mountain. I gotta continue on this one because we talk about, there's mountain is spelled with a T, like Jesus on the cross. In between now we get mountain, which also mounting the N, just like the jackal mounting the N. So we look at, I could see eat. We look at. I need a second. Tesla. We could look at this as water waves. We know that salt. You could say a salt. Dealing with that atom. Anyway, a salt. Salt is a conductor of electricity and water. Also is steel. And so we deal with steel, we're also stealing. We're all going from the give and take thing. The least you could do. And then we know that's tails. Tails from the crip is also like sea and rip. Like ripping the sea is also splitting the sea. And it's interesting when you split the C, we also get the S. Like you twist the S. So I think I was right in not and unknot. I meant to write tie and untie. Tie equals 7 and untie equals 6. I had me thinking of steam. Because I'm thinking of steamed vegetables right now. But that's going to get me into the pH balance. And it's fucked up, this hocus pocus of like the food pyramid and how industrial agriculture has got us living off death. So when we look at like a lot of these monks, let me be more specific, a lot of the ones who are into the energy of chi, a lot of them shave their heads. I was looking at this because I'm growing my hair out. I've been looking at Native American stuff, and I've gone vegan for about 2 years. Decided to grow my hair out and not wear deodorant or any of that shit. And I hope this camera's been on because I'll be pissed if it's not. But there's a part two coming up. But part of that is because they keep what's called the sangha. They unify their energy and protect it. Um, and I'll get into that. But it's interesting. That sounds like song, like singing. And so, just like the hymn, we look at some of this old artwork. We see a lot of this old symbology. Closer to home. That's going to go in my title right here. So when they say enlighten, it's like passing the torch. So we could say like a baton. And we look at baton to pass a baton. We could also see the L, M, N, no, like that is a baton right here, right? Looks like a baton. So passing the baton. We see that looks like lightning, like to enlighten. But we also see boat and baton. Or we see bat on. Oh, we see tap. I'm supposed to go to some St. Patrick's thing tomorrow, which I don't really care about. But I gotta wake up early. But we see pattern. So we see pattern, we see pat, turns. I was thinking about the general pattern to tap. What makes me think of the switch. Because when we look at LMNO, that looks like a light switch. So we see like witch and switch. And we're dealing with different directions. And we know that there's an oar of a ship, and the oar of the ship has to do with directions or the sail. Oar is row. Row is egg or fish eggs. Baby fish eggs, I believe. So until the next, I don't know what to leave it with because there's always a and then. I'm not one to be like that's the way it is, and because I'm learning stuff too, but because you are the anthem, thinking about the song, and seesaw makes me think of sing song because the way to master the seesaw is at the center, which is singing the song, or I look at it as riding the wave. So I'm probably going to stop this and come up with a bunch more stuff when I recharge, and then I'll take it to part two. If you've been checking my stream, I appreciate you. This is RENÉG. I want to get into more talks on telepathy. And the L having to do with levels and the left and the right. And the L is also like a lever. Which makes me think of LL Cool J. Never ever pull my lever. So because we got that LL. And then we got that cool J, which is also the X, which is also that 10. Like thaw. So last full moon of winter, I had to put some stuff down. I'm gonna pick up my energy for the second part of the RENÉG Third Eye Mind brainstorms. If you're checking my stream, please check me. Leave a comment. And a reason I'm going live is because I have like my internet service was cutting out here, and it's a way that I could just keep going without it stopping my recording because I don't really have time to go back and forth and edit. So it's all about just getting in the groove and dropping gems. So to the next.